So we're among friends. We're all here for a salon on the topic of longevity. So I'm just going to come right out and ask the question, what's so great about longevity anyway? 50 years ago, actually a little more than that, 1961, JFK got up and gave his most important speech on aging. And he said we'd added years to life. Now it's time to add life to those years. And we've added about a month a year on average since he delivered those words. And so here we are, 2017, and we're obsessed with living even longer and just as much staying younger. And you know, it was not always this way. Go back 400 years, the beginning of the country, the Puritans, as much as we are trying to get young, they were trying to get old. They lied on the census and said they were 2 or 3 years older than they were. We do exactly the opposite. I think we lie and say we're 3 years younger than we are. They wore those white wigs, and I kid you not, they had specially trained tailors who made people look slumped over. And you know, when I read that, I already got the white hair. I'm already pre-slumped. I would have been a great Puritan. I could have been a male model in around 1670 if I had only had the fortune of being born at the right time. And they had an expression, a hoary head is a crown of gold. And I had to go to the dictionary to see that hoary meant white-haired. And it was because they felt that age was a sign from the divine. It was a sign of grace. It meant that you were closer to God. So if you fast forward 400 years, things are a bit different. If anybody doubts that assertion, hop into your car and drive a half hour south, or if you have the traffic I had coming over here today, 4 hours south in Silicon Valley, where there is an all-out effort by billionaires and brilliant scientists and medical technologists to not only dramatically increase our lifespans, but go even further and conquer mortality. There was a cover of Forbes a couple months ago entitled, How to Cheat Death. And the efforts in the Valley are not just about cheating death, they're about really finding the fountain of youth, about staying younger longer, cheating time every bit as much as death. And I love that last month, as I was thinking about this talk, HBO's Silicon Valley had an episode entitled Blood Boy. Did anybody here see the Blood Boy episode? In mid-meeting, Gavin Belson, the disgraced co-founder of the fictional, but not really that fictional, Hulu, is interrupted mid-meeting by Bryce, his transfusion associate, who wheels in these two connected throne-like chairs. And the two of them sit down. He's described strapping blonde guy as, Gavin says, he could have been a Nazi propaganda poster. And he begins pumping his strapping youthful blood into the aging CEO in an effort to offset the ravages of age. So I'm going to go back to that question. What is it exactly that's so great about living longer if you've got to get a transfusion associate? But less facetiously, how is it that we make the most of all this gift of longevity we've already received? And it's a question that I've been thinking about for 3 decades since I was in my own 20s, and I never really actually set out to ask that question, but I was really interested in a question that Amy just posed, and it was about young people and what it took to help young people who were growing up in poverty succeed against the odds. Obviously, that's a complex issue that could be a TED Talk in and of itself, but one of the most striking realizations as I was doing that work is the importance of social connection, really of love. Love matters most, and love in the form of people who care for young people. Jori Bronfenbrenner, who was a famous child development expert, once one of the founders of the Head Start program, really captured, I could give you boatloads of research. He said, what every kid needs is at least one adult who's irrationally crazy about them. And research on kids who who were resilient, who succeeded despite the odds, shows that. Research on programs, mentoring programs, things like Big Brothers Big Sisters confirmed it, but they also confirmed a less uplifting fact, which is that there were vast waiting lists on those programs for people to care, to love, to connect. And so a question emerged: where are the human beings to do those things that only human beings can do? And even then, 30 years ago, before there were salons on longevity, you spend any length of time looking at the demographic changes underway, and the conclusion was obvious. It was in the older population, which was our great repository, not just of time, but of numbers, and just seemed to be the only increasing natural resource in the country in terms of human capital, social capital, what kids needed, those things that only human beings could do in a whole set of spheres. And so I got really intoxicated with this idea of bringing older people and younger people together for mutual benefit, until somebody asked me the question, is anybody actually doing it? It sounds good. So I went out on a journey around the country trying to find examples, and I discovered a government program. Something called the Foster Grandparent Program was created during the War on Poverty at the same time as Head Start, with the novel idea of connecting older people, mostly older women who were low income, with kids in desperate need of support, some in institutional settings, some in schools. And I went around the country talking to foster grandparents, and the culmination occurred on the pediatrics ward of Maine Medical Center. Maine Medical Center, finest hospital in that state then as now, and in the form of two little old ladies. And I say that with no derogatory intent. Aggie Bennett was 4'11", and Louise Casey, 4'10". You couldn't help but look down at them. They were in their late 70s at the time. And Aggie and Louise had failed retirement. Aggie said she wanted to wear away, not rust away. So after her job as a waitress through her life, and Louise worked in a sawmill, they signed up for foster grandparents every day, 5 days a week. They trudged over to Maine Medical Center on brilliant sunny summer days in the dead of winter, and they were having the time of their life when I met them. There's a wonderful line by the poet Marge Piercy: "The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real." And that's what Aggie and Louise found there, along with an enormous amount of fun. I showed up one day, Aggie was chasing kids around dressed as a tiger, a 4'11" tiger. I think it was Halloween. And I remember asking her about that. She said, "It's not a job, it's a joy." It was a joy, but it was also work of just extraordinary importance, because let me set the scene for you. So Maine Medical Center, best hospital in the state, big state, poor state. You got kids coming from hours away, close to the Canadian border in some cases. The sickest kids are staying there for an extended period, and oftentimes their parents have got to leave because they work in a sawmill or as a waitress. They've got 4 other kids, and they just have to go back. So imagine, put yourself in their shoes, these kids' shoes. You're 8 years old, you've got cancer, you're 5 hours away from home in a strange setting, maybe even in pain, and you're alone. And that's where Aggie and Louise came in. They became family to these kids. I'm tempted to say surrogate family, foster grandparents. They were real family to these kids. And Blake has a line, William Blake: "Joy and woe are woven fine." And for all the joy on the pediatrics ward of Maine Medical Center, there was undeniable woe. And I remember one story that captured it more powerfully than anything. And it all started out me asking Aggie and Louise, did they ever think of quitting? And they just kind of scoffed. If they were the kind of people who would have spit on the ground, they would have spit on the ground. But then they got very serious, and Aggie started talking, and she told me about one experience that she had had. And I was going to characterize it, but I just decided to read her words because they deserve to be read. She said, "I don't think I'd been here a year when the head of the unit, she asked me, 'How strong a person are you?' I said, 'Well, I've always prided myself that I was strong.' She says, 'We've got a baby that is dying, and we promised that mother that her baby would not die in a crib. Do you think you could hold her? Well, they put me in a room here. They kept checking on me, and that baby did not die in no crib. That baby died in my arms, and I was always so grateful for that. I didn't feel fear. I just felt good. And she turned to Louise and said, you know how it is, Louise, when you sit with them and your heart's aching, but you don't let them know it. And so I went to Portland with a question. Where are the human beings to do those things that only human beings can do? And I came away with no ambiguity about the answer to that question. But I came away with another question, which is why isn't this happening everywhere? Not just in every pediatrics ward in the country, but in every neighborhood, on every block, in every school. And I set out to try to figure out why. And that answer is a whole talk in and of itself, but I'll just tell you quickly why. It's because we've put a halt to it. We've made it impossible. And it's not a nefarious tale. It's a tale that started 50 years ago at a time when older people were pariahs in society. Walter Reuther, the great labor leader, got up in front of the UAW convention in 1948 and described retirees as too old to work, too young to die. And it was also a time when the country was infatuated with the idea of teenagers in the mid-1950s. And a group of entrepreneurs, foremost among them a guy named Del Webb, came up with this brilliant idea. Create a community apart from the rest of society where older people could pretend that they were younger people. They could have a second childhood. He coined a phrase, the golden years, and built this community around the idea of graying is playing. It was called Sun City. He had developed his skills building these communities, building the Japanese American internment camps in California. His response when questioned about that, a job's a job. So this job was to create this false world in the middle of the desert, turn the desert into a golf course, and summon older people from around the country to fun and games. And the first weekend they opened, 100,000 people showed up. There was a traffic jam for 12 miles leading into Sun City. But there was a secret, a bad and dirty secret that underlied it all. The only way you could preserve the illusion was to keep children away. If everyone was old, nobody was old. And to this day, there's 70,000 people living in Sun City. There are age police ferreting out the human contraband from they're also known as kids. And so, we did that then, but it's not just these Sun Cities of the world and leisure worlds where that's happening. I just spent the last few years with my father in a nursing home in Philadelphia, fine place, orderly, clean. It's not till you're actually there a little while where you realize there's not anybody under the age of 70 absent the staff. We used to come with our 3 kids, and it was almost like we dropped in from the planet Xenon, people reaching out to touch these children. And it was particularly cruel in his case because he was a gym teacher. When he took early retirement, he spent that running track meets for elementary school kids. And so, all these tales of transfusion associates and age police, age apartheid, it seems like I'm heading towards a grim conclusion, but actually, I want to ask something else, which is what if there was another way, a way infused with the spirit of Aggie and Louise? And I'm so excited to report that there is another way. If we rerouted the river of life 50 years ago, all over the country, people are returning it to its natural course. We're seeing what might be characterized as a generativity revolution. That idea of generativity came from psychologist Erik Erikson, who said the hallmark of successful development in later life could be encapsulated in the phrase, I am what survives of me, taking what you've learned and passing it on to the next generation. George Valent from Harvard Medical School has shown in the most significant longitudinal study ever mounted that people in midlife and beyond who do that are 3 times as likely to be happy as those who fail to. And he says it's not an accident. It is deeply rooted in human nature. Biology flows downhill. So if biology flows downhill, why doesn't society flow downhill? And in fact, it's starting to change. They're all over the country, innovators who are returning the river of life to its natural course. There's an intergenerational school in Cleveland I visited last year where older people are built deeply into the fabric. It's one of the highest performing charter schools in the state of Maine. In Little Havana in Miami, I've been to an early childhood center where the same thing is happening. I was just last week at the Treehouse Foundation in central Massachusetts, which is an unsung city, foster families living together, supporting each other, and supported by dozens of elders who live in subsidized housing among them. It feels natural because it is. And then after I saw them, I headed back to Portland, and I confess in part it was to get some of that inspiration that Aggie and Louise had provided me. And when I was there, I heard about Gorham House, a nursing home 30 minutes outside of the city, which is built around a preschool. So I drive out there, you're coming up the driveway, and the first thing that hits you is this burst of color, this playground. Then the sound of laughter, children's laughter, and the sight of older people involved in everything that's going on, laughing themselves. Gorham House says its competitive advantage, it's on its website, is that they have an army of grandparents who are ready to be deployed. And so I immediately, of course, wanted to take my father there, but it was not to be. He died on the eve of Father's Day this past June, last month. And I grieve him still, but I feel such a sense of liberation that he's out of that place, these soulless corridors of age apartheid that constituted the nursing home where he was at, and was so different from Gorham House. But at his memorial service, there was a passage that was read that captured everything that he was about and everything that I'm trying to talk about today. It comes from the Talmud. It's called the Acorn, and I'm not going to give you the Talmudic reading of the story, but basically this crusty rabbi comes upon an old guy who's planting an acorn and says, "Why are you wasting your time planting an acorn? You're never going to see that tree come up." And the old guy slowly turns and faces him and says, "I'm planting this seed because I've spent my whole life under trees that people before me planted, and I'm planting this for those who follow." So that's my message to you today. That's my plea. Stop trying so hard to be young, but plant trees under whose shade we shall never sit. Don't try to be young. Be there for those who actually are. Do it for our country. We have more older people than younger people for the first time ever, and that's going to become even more pronounced. It's the only way we're going to make it as a society. But even more, do it for yourself, for your happiness, because the real fountain of youth is the fountain with youth. And the only way, the true way to live forever is to live together across time, across ages, right now, and for generations to come. Thank you.